Now folks, we're here in New York, the greatest city in the world. But New York's cost of living is out of control, much like its rat population. In fact, the MTA loves Halloween because it's the one day of the year they can pretend the New York City rats are there by design. Now, an absurd cost of living means that places like New York and San Francisco have a huge homelessness problem. In fact, the number of New Yorkers living in homeless shelters has increased by 60% over the last decade. A number that Bill de Blasio does not believe, because according to his approval rating, there's no such number as high as 60%. Now, some folks who aren't homeless face monster commutes in order to access affordable housing. For example, Sheila James, she was profiled by the New York Times in 2017. To get to her job in San Francisco by 7 a.m., she takes 2 trains and a bus, which means she has to rise at 2:15 a.m. That's in like 20 minutes. Now, this issue is starting to attract attention on the campaign trail, with, for example, Bernie Sanders advocating for a policy of national rent control, which has never worked before, much like Prince Harry. Oh, sorry, that's not true. Prince Harry's moving to Canada, where he's going to start working to achieve financial independence. In fact, starting Monday, you'll be able to see him at Tim Hortons. Rent control doesn't work because it caps the amount of profit developers can make, thereby deterring construction. In fact, San Francisco tried rent control and rents went up by 5%. And now homelessness in the city is at a 17-year high, a term that can also be used to describe Snoop Dogg. Now, in Silicon Valley, the house price to income ratio has doubled since 1980. The only other thing in America to double in that period is the number of women winning the Oscar for Best Director. Oh wait, that's not true. It only went up from 0 to 1. Hey Siri, what does patriarchy look like?
Patriarchy is a social system in which men hold primary power and predominate in roles of political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. Want to hear more?
No, that's quite clear. Now, with rising population and increasing urbanization, absent a change in policy, this problem shows no sign of abating. Which brings us to Japan. Now, Japan experienced many of these same issues several decades ago. In fact, in 1990, the house price to income ratio in Tokyo was 18 times. Things were so out of control that the value of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo exceeded the real estate value of all of California. Although, to be fair to California, that valuation didn't include Kim's booty or her duck face. Sustained economic stagnation in Japan from 1991 to 2000 led to what the Japanese call the lost decade, which is different to the lost decade we have in America, which refers to all the time you spent watching Game of Thrones. Now, you might be thinking that the Japanese solved this issue with an uber-Japanese solution. They made love to robots, resulting in a new generation of robot that doesn't need housing. But that's not what happened. Instead, the Japanese government relaxed development laws, culminating in the 2002 Urban Renaissance Law, which is different to the Urban Renaissance New York experience when Trump changed his domicile to Florida. Now, the Urban Renaissance Law relaxed white people. It's not about gentrification. This law makes it a lot easier to rezone land. For example, it becomes easier to repurpose office sites for residential purposes. Landowners can do whatever they want with their land, and their neighbors can't do anything about it. If you want to build a combination Taco Bell wheat farm, so be it. Now, Tokyo's planning framework has 12 zones, defined according to the maximum nuisance level allowed. Anything can be built, residential, commercial, or industrial, provided it doesn't exceed that zone's maximum nuisance level. Now, think of these nuisance levels as a spectrum, ranging from the lovable Tom Hanks, to the barely tolerable Bill de Blasio, to the coronavirus Tommy Lauren. On a scale of 1 to 12, Tommy occupies zones 12 to 15. Now, these laws mean that areas zoned for retail can see hotels converted into housing, but areas zoned for housing can't be converted into commercial usage. So market supply can quickly react to demand. Sadly, in America, new building construction is often thwarted by NIMBYism, which are grassroots efforts to preserve the status quo. Now, NIMBY stands for not in my backyard. Now, if someone sees Roger Stone, please let him know this, because he thinks it stands for Nixon is my Beyonce. That's not Photoshop. You can't make this up. That's a real picture. Google it, you'll see it. Now, NIMBY efforts range from petitions to lawsuits, but they often prevail despite being so clearly evil. So in this way, they're kind of like Mitch McConnell. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if NIMBY was Mitch McConnell's nickname in college, NIMBY Mitch the Turtle Bitch. Very bad turtle Mitch quitting Trump this week. No letters for you. Now, NIMBYism makes housing unaffordable by restricting supply. And frankly, the only time there should be constraints on creating something new is when the person doing the procreating is named Kushner.
Or Duggar.
Reba? Give it up for Reba, the American... What are you doing out here?
Look, Ali-Asghar, I cannot let this show go on a moment longer without warning everyone about the impending genetic Armageddon brought on by the Duggar family.
Okay, that's oddly specific and has nothing to do with Japan.
It has everything to do with Japan because they were on a Japanese documentary because they are a menace, okay? In the last 15 years, they have November-decoupled in size.
November-decoupled?
Maybe. I don't know my tuples too good. But in the last 15 years, they had 19 kids.
That's a lot of kids.
Yeah, you're not kidding. And hold on to your butt, because the oldest 8 children are now reproducing, and there's 14 more Duggar grandchildren. That's genetic terrorism.
Whoa. Genetic terrorism, that feels a bit strong.
It's not, okay? Because you watch, just shortly, everyone on Earth will be able to trace their roots back to Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar. Is that the future you want, Ali-Asghar?
Oh my God, you're right. My grandfather is Jim Bob Duggar.
I know, the results of your 23andMe came back. You're 100% Duggar.
This has been a Duggar
moment. This hat is not to protect the Duggars from hearing my thoughts, but protect me from being reproduced with them. Bye.
So, what's the impact of all these changes that Tokyo made? Well, in 2014, Tokyo built 140,000 new homes against a population of 13 million. Conversely, California built 80,000 new homes against their population of 40 million people and Tony Lauren. Now, this is hardly encouraging, considering that the next year, 2050, the Bay Area had 64,000 jobs, but only built 5,000 homes, which is about 13 people to a home, which is still only half a home for the Duggar family.
That's still too many Duggars.
So it's no surprise that rents in the Bay Area are soaring, where in Tokyo they're pretty flat, much like the UCK's comeback. Some UCK fans here? Okay. Now, stable prices aren't the result of Tokyo having an abundance of public housing. In fact, the public housing is only about 5% of the supply of Tokyo, compared to about 17% in London. Now, no, that 17% doesn't include Buckingham Palace, which technically isn't public housing, even though it absolutely should be. I'm just saying, there are 9,000 homeless people in London and 800 spare rooms at Buckingham Palace, which works out to be about 12 people to a room, or as that's known in India, underpopulated. Relax, social justice warriors, I'm Indian, I get to say these things. Now, Tokyo rents have been stable despite population growth, as the city continues to attract domestic migrants, which is known in Japan as the only acceptable form of migration. Now, Tokyo responds to demand by building lots of small one-bedroom apartments, compared to other cities like New York, where having a roommate is often a necessity. So although the average apartment size in Tokyo is smaller, the average Tokyoite has more space, so they can actually afford to live alone with their video games. So in Tokyo, there are no anxiety-inducing conversations because house prices are relatively stable. much like Jared Kushner's fight against puberty. And buying versus renting isn't a life-changing decision because Tokyo has figured out how to supply housing. If only they could also figure out how to clothe sumo wrestlers. We're going to take a break. When we come back, Cheryl Clavel will be joining us, but first, a message from our sponsors.
Woo!